The war on Christmas.
You're the golden red tide, got the strength to carry on. Won't go, my child, won't go. Hello, beautiful soul family. Britt Cannon here, host of the Walk On podcast, the podcast where I try to demystify spirituality, personal growth and healing, and whatever else I feel like talking about. This week's episode is called The War on Christmas. And really it serves as a critique of the, for lack of a better word, abuse tactics, gaslighting tactics of the moral majority, meaning like the white Christian conservatives, especially the ones that are higher up, like your Fox News pundits, even in macrocosms, you're like, evangelical preachers, stuff like that. Like people who hold a kind of systemic power. Usually they're white cis men with money. Although if they don't have money, sometimes they just have power, like power over a congregation. And they're just basically inciting fear in their congregations, in their audience, in their constituency if they're politicians, about like this fabricated attack on traditional family values. Like I equated in the episode to like the fear mongering surrounding gay marriage, right? Like that it's like attacking the sanctity of Christian marriage between a man and a woman when really one has nothing to do with the other. It's all marriage, so you can look at it like that, but it's just, all it is like a point that's driven home to make people who have privilege, these like people in these congregations, they're usually like middle to upper middle class, like Christian white people. So they don't have a lot to fear moving through the world day to day. They just don't have a lot of ways in which they're marginalized. And so how do you strike fear in them? Well, you make them afraid that their way of life is being attacked by acknowledging other people's way of life. I mean, I think the most like on the nose manifestation of this at this time is the white Christian conservative propagandists' fear of teaching critical race theory. I mean, I don't really understand how teaching something like the reality of the horrors of slavery, like you could say that kids are too young to learn about it, but if you are someone who grew up like I did in the 90s, 90s to early 2000s was my time in public schools. And I grew up in Virginia, so like a lot of what we learned was just straight up wrong. Like that the Civil War was about states' rights, that it was about taxation, that it wasn't about slavery in and of itself. And then, something always rubbed me the wrong way about that, honestly. Because if you there would be pictures in the history book, it wasn't like taught in an honest way, but still owning people pretty bad. I also grew up watching like The Color Purple and like stuff like that. So or anything, from like fried green tomatoes, like anything that takes place in the antiquated South, there's this heaviness of race relations and like this specter of white supremacy, and like they're always the bad guys, the white guys, the racist white guys, the violent white guys, like they're always the bad guys. So I wasn't even taught it in like an educational way, but still I knew that the information I was being given wasn't quite right. And of course my teachers were white, my teachers were conservative, because Virginia's in the Bible Belt, right? So there was a slant or a spin on the actual information that hid the truth And even like just made stuff up, just like spouted the program of the white supremacist capitalist heteropatriarchy. And all it did was make me have to learn more on my own. You know what I mean? Like I was going to find out the information anyway. And it's been really fascinating to me, like how the more I listen to other people's perspectives, like the more I expose myself to different cultures, the more the truth is right there. You know what I mean? You just have to dig a little deeper. So I'm not talking about that in this episode, but like I think it is one of those, it's like it's not doing anyone any harm to learn the truth of American history. The only people it harms are the institutions, you know, the powers that be, the people that oppress us, the systems that oppress us. And I think that's why they don't want to teach it. It's just a control tactic disguised as protection, disguised as preservation. And it really works on these people because, well, I've heard it said before that, like, you know, like a man's greatest fear, a cis straight man's greatest fear is that he's going to be treated like a woman in society, right? Like that's why when you hear an anti-feminist talk about feminism, you know, it's always like all they can picture is them being treated the way that women are treated. And so it tells you that they know something's wrong, right? And I think it's the same for white people or anyone who holds systemic privilege. Like, you understand on at least one level that what you're doing is wrong. And so to bring it back around to the topic at hand, like the war on Christmas is in these conservative Christian white propagandists' mind is an attack on the holiday of Christmas, the Christian tradition of Christmas, you know, Jesus's holiday, Jesus's birthday, which, you know, historically speaking is incorrect. If Jesus even existed, his birthday probably wasn't December 25th. But I don't know, man. It's just like, I talk a lot about the origins of Christmas in the full podcast episode, the link to which you can find in the description box. But it's just like, Christmas isn't even Christmas. You know what I mean? Christmas is Yule. Christmas is winter solstice. Like Christmas, all the traditions we know and love either come from paganism or Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, which, by the way, is about a fucking capitalist, you know, an Ebenezer Scrooge, a wealth-hoarding landlord boss, basically, who works his workers to the bone, who doesn't pay them a living wage, who makes them work on Christmas, who has to be emotionally tortured by his old friends, by ghosts, by the threat of his own lonely demise in order to change and be a good person and see that he's not treating people well, to realize that he has to, like, be a better human, a more loving human, a more generous human, and in fact, a more, like, alive human. That he's been so obsessed with materialism that he's lost sight of who he is entirely, who he used to be. I mean, he's even, like, totally forgotten about love, right? And so it isn't that funny, like, looking at what Christmas has become. The Black Friday, you know, massacres and, like, people getting trampled to death and, like, people spending money they don't have to buy presents. You know, just this, like, it's just been it's become a hyper-capitalist, you know, greed-oriented, spend, materialist shit show, you know? And I think Charles Dickens would be pretty upset about that. So, you know, paganism, Charles Dickens, anti-capitalist, and or like just someone who really was here for the plight of the poor, who had a lot of interest in explaining how bad rich people were in, fantasized, in like phantasmagoric ways. And third source, 1930s Coca Cola ad, which gave us like the Santa Claus in the red velvet and the white fur trim. And so it's like, okay, so you're like ancient tradition, you're like this thing that you're entitled to that no one else can even acknowledge that any other holidays happen this time of year. Like this thing that is so sacred to you is like 35 seconds old. And the parts, like it's plagiarized, it's like made up, it's nice, I like Christmas, I like Christmas movies, I like a pretty tree, I like a garland, I like the lights on the outside of the house, you know what I mean? Like I don't mind it, I don't hate it, but it's just like, let's be real about what you're getting your panties all bunched up about. And also how the origins of the holiday and the person it's supposedly celebrating would really be upset about the way that it's going. Would really be upset about the exclusionary attitude that's been adopted by people who are supposed to be celebrating like generosity and the plight of the poor and togetherness and unity and like universal love, man. What was Jesus all about? I'm gonna get more into that in next week's episode, but all this to say, like, if it's not really about Christianity, if it's not, I almost did my Sean Connery, ChRiStMaS. If it's not all about ChRiStMaS and then what is it really about? What's the purpose? If acknowledging that other holidays exist, or if simply saying happy holidays, if other people being acknowledged, if people are like celebrating it in a secular way, like if that's not really what it's about, because that's not really threatening to the sanctity of Christmas, then what is it really about? Well, it's what I was talking about in the beginning of this. It is control. A great way to control people is through fear. Making them fearful of their way of life, making them fearful that people are coming for their faith. That's religious freedom, and like the the fallacy of religious liberation in like European terms. Like this has typically been used for a lot of violence in the world. And a lot of genocide attempts. So, it's just like it's a nerve for white people who don't have any other ways of being marginalized. That's not to say that all white people don't have ways of being marginalized. Everyone experiences like privilege and oppression in different areas at different times. I always describe it as like overlapping Venn diagrams, so chill. But if you live in a McAllister mansion, if your whole family votes Republican, if you're a member of the Young Republicans, if your whole family wears polo on your professional photo shoots, if you have nepotism to get into an Ivy League university, if you've known you were going to run for Congress your whole life, you know what I mean? It's like, maybe you're not super oppressed, and so maybe focusing in on your religion and deciding that is being targeted is a good way to get all riled up and like on your soapbox. And also, on an even like in relation to that, connected to that, and the even more sinister side of that is that conservative Christian white people fueled by money, have historically, seemingly compulsively, like systemically abused others, have caused a lot of harm to especially people of color throughout the world. Conquering, enslaving, genociding, stealing land from, stealing labor from, we colonizing, forcing people to become Christian. Like, there's just a lot of not good stuff we've done. And to flip that script on its head, and then for especially like Christian conservative white people to frame themselves as a victim, is a pretty classic abuse tactic. If anyone out there watching has been in an abusive relationship, you know that one of the forms of gaslighting you may experience is when your abuser presents themselves as the victim and then presents you as the abuser. So like, say someone's just like wearing you down and wearing you down and wearing you down and picking at you and picking at you and picking at you and being so cruel and so controlling. Oh, sorry. Sometimes when I talk really fast, I get out of breath. So heinous, right? That one day you finally flip. One day you're like, I'm pissed now. I'm going to tell you off. And then they're like, look at you. Look at you yelling at me. Who's the real monster here? And then you're like, oh no, am I the monster? And then you set about defending yourself, or even like then fawning to the abuser to like, because you want to be a good person, because it matters to you to be a good person. That's, I think, what's happening here in a bigger way, right? Like, people who have historically been the bad guys are framing themselves as the good guys, as the heroes of the story. White Christian conservatives, hardcore, have main character syndrome, because they always have been, right? And that's just really fucked up. When your abuser doesn't acknowledge that they're being abusive, it's impossible to change. It's impossible. Like, they hold the power. And their victim mentality really keeps them from being able to grow, from being able to be better people, from being able to mend in some small way the rift that they've caused throughout history. It's just really fucked up, and it's like not nice. I don't think Jesus would like it. I don't think it's a good birthday present for Jesus. And I also think it's just like so small in the grand scheme of things. Like, I often think that, man, if those very problematic like news segments where someone would have to like walk through the world as like a fat person, or like a man would dress up like a woman and be like, wow, it is actually really hard to be a woman. Like, if that were to happen in real life, like if we all got Freaky Friday'd, the white Christian conservatives, little feelsies and fragile egos would not be able to stand it. They would not be able to stand being marginalized. They would tear the world down. Even the idea, even the falsity, the suggestion that they might one day eventually be marginalized is like too much for them to handle. And isn't that funny? So, in closing to this little ramble, I just think it's important to like know that's what's happening. I think it's important to point it out. I think it's important to make fun of the war on Christmas. Growing up with like people who don't have the best critical thinking skills, like, oh my God, the like happy holidays, and then being like, Merry Christmas. It's just like so petty. It's so small. And I don't know, happy holidays. That's what I wanted to talk about. If you want to listen to the full episode, as I said below, it's down in the, as I said before, it's down in the description block box below for you to check out. You can also find a link to listen to my original song Walk On, which is the theme song to this podcast. You can buy my book, you can buy my merch, you can read my blog on my website, brittcannon.me. You can follow me on Instagram, you can follow me on Twitter. Check it all out down below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's get these views keys up. Love you guys. Happy holidays. Bye.